Marcus Webb was 38 years old, a home builder who had framed half the houses on his street and read a set of plans the way other men read the morning paper. He had built his daughter a treehouse with a real glass window. He coached his son's ball team on Saturdays. On a Tuesday in April, he came home from a job site to a house with the locks changed, a note taped to the door, and two small pairs of shoes gone from the spot by the entry where they always landed at the end of the day. His wife had taken their children and left for good. She had taken the savings, the house, and, with a story she told a judge, the legal right to be the only parent they had. For 3 years he was a man with no one to come home to. Then, on an ordinary winter night 2,000 miles away, she turned on the television and saw her husband's photograph on CNN. What she had thrown away was about to become very, very clear. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house was silent when he opened the door that Tuesday, and the silence was the first thing that told him, before he'd read a word of the note. Marcus had grown up the kind of poor where the lights went out sometimes, and he had built his whole adult life so that his own kids would never know that particular dark. He'd learned framing at 17, foundations at 19, and by the time he was 30, he could walk a job site and feel where a house would fail the way some people feel rain coming in a bad knee. He believed a home was the most honest thing a man could make, that you poured it true and square, or it told on you in 20 years, in a door that wouldn't close, and a crack that wandered up a wall. He had poured his own family the same way, slow, square, meant to last. He was the kind of father who showed up. He built the treehouse over 3 weekends because his daughter, Grace, asked for a house up where the birds are. He never missed one of his son Andre's games, and when he couldn't get off the site in time, he'd come straight in his work boots and stand at the fence in a cloud of concrete dust, and Andre would find him there every time. He read the same book at bedtime so many nights he could say it with his eyes closed, and Grace would correct him if he skipped a page, which he sometimes did on purpose just to hear her catch it. He kept a running tally of Andre's hits on the inside of the garage door in carpenter's pencil. He thought that was what building a life looked like. He didn't know that for over a year his wife had been deciding it looked like something else, and that a man named Grant Halloran, who wore good suits and talked about portfolios, had begun to look to her like an upgrade from a man who came home smelling of sawdust. The note was 4 sentences. The last one said she was giving the children a real future, and that he shouldn't make this harder than it had to be. He stood in the empty front hall a long time. He did not put his fist through the wall he'd hung himself, though his whole body wanted to. He walked through the house instead, room by room, the way he'd walk a structure after a storm, and he saw what was gone. Andre's room, stripped to the mattress, the ball glove gone from the bedpost. Grace's room, the little bed bare, but on the floor by it, left behind in the hurry, the bedtime book, the one he could say with his eyes closed, and he picked it up and held it, and could not, for a moment, do anything at all. The savings passbook, gone from the kitchen drawer. And by the front door, the worst thing, the small absence that undid him, the empty patch of floor where 2 pairs of little shoes should have been at the end of the day. He crouched down and put his hand flat on the bare wood there for a moment. Then he stood up, because there was nothing else to do, and he noticed his own hands were shaking, and he filed that away too. The way he filed everything, without yet knowing what he'd do with it. He had built her the life she said she wanted. The year before, when her boutique idea needed a deposit, he'd worked a winter of overtime and put the money down. He'd refinished the floors of the house she now had the locks to. He'd noticed, in the last year, the phone she angled away, the silver card twice on his street. The way she'd stopped asking about his day and started asking, pointedly, what he thought he'd ever really be. He'd told himself it was a rough patch. He had extended her the benefit of every doubt, because that was who he was, and that was his flaw, and he knew it. His old foreman, Sully, had told him once, "Marcus, you're the only man I ever met who'd keep loaning trust to somebody who'd already defaulted on it twice." He hadn't thought much about it at the time. That was what Bianca had never understood, until 3 years and 1 news segment later. The full shape of it came clear over the weeks that followed, and it was worse than a woman simply leaving. His mother, Esther, 64, who had watched the whole marriage with a quiet that wasn't approval, came and stayed with him, and she was the one who started keeping track when Marcus was too gutted to. Bianca had not just left. She had filed first, and filed dirty. The petition claimed Marcus had abandoned the family, a man who had never missed a single night under that roof, and because he was on a job out of state when the papers were served, and because he made the mistake of trusting that the truth would speak for itself. A default order came down before he understood what was happening. She got the house, she got the savings, she got primary custody and a support order, all of it built on a sentence that was a lie. And she drained the one account that wasn't joint, the children's college fund. The one he'd started the week each of them was born, down to $41, and moved it, his lawyer would later trace, into an account she now shared with Grant Halloran. None of it had been sudden. Deborah pulled the timeline, and it told its own story. The apartment Bianca and Grant had leased 2 months before she left. The school she'd already enrolled the kids in 2 time zones away. The petition drafted while Marcus was still reading them their bedtime book at night. The leaving had looked like a Tuesday. It had been built for over a year, quietly, the way he built a house, except she'd been building the demolition. "There's more," his attorney Deborah Mott said, in the even voice of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "She's moved them 2 time zones away. She's asking the court to limit your contact. And Marcus," she paused, "the children think you left them. That's the story they're being told. That their father walked out." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He folded his hands on the table to keep them still. "What do I do?" he said. "We can fight it," Deborah said. "It'll be long, and it'll be ugly, and the children will be in the middle of every minute of it." "Or," she looked at him, "what do you want to do?" He stood over all of it the way he stood over a set of plans before he broke ground, not looking at any single piece, looking at the whole of it together, feeling where the lines connected. The lie ran to the order. The order ran to the distance. The distance ran to a story 2 small kids were being read at bedtime now. A story where their father didn't want them. He could see the whole shape of it. And he understood, standing there. The one thing a builder knows in his bones: you cannot win a fight by tearing down the house your children are standing in. He didn't move fast. That's the part she would never have been able to account for. He could have spent every dollar he had on lawyers and made the next 3 years a war, and a smaller, more frightened man would have. He didn't. Not because he didn't want his children back. He wanted them so badly some mornings he could not stand up straight. But because he had watched, on 100 job sites, what happens when you rush a foundation, and he was not going to pour his kid's childhood onto a cracked one. So he made a decision that looked, from the outside, like surrender, and was the opposite. He would not fight her in front of them. He would build the truth instead, and he would let it cure, and he would be standing on it when they were old enough to come and check the work themselves. So he wrote them. Every week. A letter to Andre and a letter to Grace every Sunday night at the kitchen table after the work was done. To Andre, he wrote about the job sites, what they'd framed that week, how you read a load, why you measure twice. To Grace, he wrote smaller and drew pictures in the margins of birds because of the treehouse. And he told her the glass window was still there waiting, and a cardinal had built a nest on the sill. He signed everyone the same way. I'm not going anywhere. Love, Dad. He drove them to the post office himself on Monday mornings before the crew showed up. And every week, for a long while, they came back. Stamped refused, returned to sender in his wife's careful hand, sometimes a whole stack at once. The first time, he sat in the truck in the post office lot and didn't drive for 20 minutes. Then, he did the only thing he knew how to do, which was the next right thing. He did not stop writing. He built a wooden box for the returned letters, dovetailed the corners, because they deserved it, and he put each one in unopened, dated, in order. And he kept writing into the silence, because a letter she refused was still a letter that existed, still a true thing he could put his hand on, and he had a builder's faith that true things, kept square and in order, outlast whatever gets stacked against them. And he poured the rest of himself into the work, because the work was the only thing big enough to take all of it. He had lost his house and his children in the same season. He could not stand the thought of another family losing theirs. So he started building homes for the ones on the brink, families a paycheck from the street, single parents. An old veteran about to be put out of the house he'd lived in for 40 years. He did the first one at cost. The second one he did for free, and stood on the new porch while a mother of 3 walked through rooms that were finally hers and put her hand over her mouth exactly the way he had in his own empty hall. After that, he couldn't stop. He started a foundation to do it bigger, and he called it Second Foundation, because that was the thing grief had taught him, that sometimes the first one cracks past saving, and a man has to pour another. And the second one, poured slow and poured in sorrow, comes out truer than the first ever was. Bianca, 2 time zones away, believed she had won. The new house was bigger. Grant's money was loud. She told people Marcus had checked out and moved on, and she had the easy certainty of a woman who'd never once had to watch her own story tested. She did not know her ex-husband was building something with his wife's old verdict in mind. What do you think you'll ever really be? Not to answer her, but to be standing inside the answer when his children came looking. It took 3 years to find out what he'd built. By then, Second Foundation had put 206 families into homes. And a producer at CNN had heard about the contractor who'd lost everything and spent it building roofs for strangers, and they sent a crew. And they ran the segment on a Thursday night in winter. Marcus Webb, in his work jacket, on a finished porch, handing a set of keys to a single mother of 2. His photograph, his name, the number 206, on screens in 40 million homes. One of those screens was in a house where the loud money had gone quiet. Grant Halloran's portfolio had collapsed 18 months earlier. Grant himself had collapsed out of the marriage not long after. The way that kind of man does when the account empties. Bianca was alone now, in a rented place she could barely hold, with 2 children and a story that had started to wear thin at the folds. And she was on the couch with the television going when her son walked in. Andre was 12 now. He stopped in the middle of the room and went still, staring at the screen. At the man on the porch in the work jacket handing keys to a stranger. At the words running underneath, built 206 homes for families in need, and something moved across a boy's face that had been told one thing for 3 years and was looking, right now, at another. "That's Dad," he said. Not a question. "Mom, that's Dad." He turned and looked at her, and it was the look that undoes a parent, the one that has started doing its own arithmetic. "You said he didn't want us. You said." He left. Grace had come to the doorway now too, 8 years old, watching her mother's face. Bianca opened her mouth and found that the sentence she had read them at 100 bedtimes would not come out, because her son was looking at her, and her husband was on the national news building roofs for other people's children, and some lies cannot survive being said out loud in front of the people they were built to fool. What happened after that did not happen all at once, but it happened. Andre found the foundation's address online and wrote his father a letter of his own, in careful 12-year-old handwriting, and it did not come back stamped refused, because Marcus opened it with hands that shook the way they had on a Tuesday 3 years before. The boy asked one question, under all the others. "Did you leave us?" And Marcus drove to his mother's and got the wooden box, and on the next plane he could afford he flew 2 time zones with 156 unopened letters, every Sunday of 3 years, dated and in order. And he set the box down in front of his son and said, "Open them. Start anywhere." I never stopped, not 1 week. Andre and Grace read their father's letters for 2 days. They started at the beginning, the first Sunday, and went in order, and they read every one. Grace found the letters with the birds drawn in the margins and the cardinal on the windowsill of a treehouse she'd half forgotten she had. And she cried in the way small children cry when something that was taken from them is quietly given back. Andre read the signature at the bottom of all 156, "I'm not going anywhere." "Love, Dad," 156 times, once a week for 3 years, in his father's blunt carpenter's hand. And somewhere in the stack, a 12-year-old understood that the man had meant it, that the going away had never been his father's at all. Esther sat with them and answered the questions a grandmother answers. And the story that had been read to them at bedtime came apart the only way a lie ever really does. Not because someone shouted it down, but because the truth was finally in the room, in order, square, where they could put their own hands on it. Bianca came to him on the 3rd day. She'd seen the box. She'd watched her children's faces change. She came to the door of the place he was staying, and she did not, in the end, ask for forgiveness. She asked, in the voice of a woman who has just understood the size of a thing, whether they could start over, now that things were different, now that there was a foundation, and a CNN segment, and money, and a name. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He was not cruel about it, because cruelty was a tool he'd never owned. "You took the kids to hurt me, and you took the money because you could. And I let you keep all of it," he said quietly, "but you told them their father left them. I've got 156 letters that say otherwise, and they've read every one." He shook his head, gently, finally. "There's no foundation left to build on here, Bianca. There hasn't been for a long time. But those kids I'll pour for again from the ground up. That part was never yours to take." He did not take her back. He did not have to win anything from her. The truth had already done that. The slow way. The way he'd known it would. He opened his arms to his children. Because the children had never been the ones who betrayed him, and he would not punish them for their mother's choices, not for 1 single day. It settled the way these things settle. The custody order was corrected once the letters and his work records made the old lie impossible to hold. The foreman's logs, the photos from the fence at every one of Andre's games, 3 years of postmarks, all pointing the same direction. In the end it was shared, and amicable on his side, because Marcus refused to make his kids choose, even when he'd have been within his rights to. Bianca kept what was left of the life she'd built, which was not much, and carried the knowledge of what she'd traded for it, the way a person carries something they can't set down. Not dramatically, just constantly. Marcus quietly refilled both college funds the week the order was signed, the way he'd started them, one for each child, the week each was born. Second foundation kept building. 206 became 300, then more. His name on none of the houses, and his hands on most of them. And Andre learned to read a set of plans, standing at his father's elbow, the way Marcus had learned at his. The first night the kids stayed over, Marcus read Grace the bedtime book he'd picked up off her floor 3 years before and never put down. On a spring evening, 3 years and a lifetime from that Tuesday, Marcus came home from a job site to a small house he'd built himself, and he stopped in the doorway, and he looked down. There by the entry, in the spot where they always landed at the end of the day, were 2 pairs of shoes, a boy's sneakers, caked in job site dust, and a girl's, smaller, kicked off in a hurry. He stood there a moment and just looked at them. 2 pairs of shoes by the door at the end of the day, the smallest and truest thing he had ever built toward. Then he heard Grace call out that dinner was almost ready, and Andre ask if he wanted to see the birdhouse they'd framed, and Marcus Webb set down his thermos by the door next to the shoes and went in to his children. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.